Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time we're going Gothic, late Victorian Gothic, with Florence Marryat's novel, The Blood of the Vampire.
Ooh, spooky.
Yeah, a bit. But also a lot more than just creepy thrills, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's so much going on beneath the surface. I mean, Marriott really uses those classic Gothic elements to expose the anxieties of Victorian society. You know, things like race and gender roles, even inheritance.
Oh, I see. So it's like using the supernatural to comment on the very real issues of the time.
Exactly, and it makes for such a fascinating read.
Okay, so let's set the stage. We've got our main character, Harriet Brandt.
Yeah, well, Harriet's a young Jamaican heiress just out of a convent, and she's like ready to take on the world.
Fresh out of the convent, huh? I bet she's in for a bit of a culture shock.
Oh, yeah. The novel describes her as pretty naive, a bit sheltered, but she also has this independent spirit, this yearning for connection.
So like vulnerable, but also strong in a way?
Yeah, exactly. Like a delicate flower, but one that's determined to grow, you know?
I like that. A delicate flower pushing through the cracks.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So this delicate flower, Harriet, she ends up in this bustling seaside town, Heist. And of course, she meets a whole cast of characters.
Oh, Heist. It's like a Victorian soap opera waiting to happen, right?
Okay.
Especially at this hotel, the Lion d'Or.
So Lion d'Or sounds fancy.
It's where everyone comes together. You've got these English ladies, Margaret and Eleanor. They're trying to navigate, you know, society and love and all the expectations that come with it.
Classic Victorian dilemmas.
Right. And then there's a Baroness Gobelli.
Okay, the Baroness. Tell me about her.
Oh, she is something else. Larger than life, claims to have supernatural powers, and just casts a spell over everyone.
A spell, literally.
Well, figuratively, I guess. But she definitely has a certain influence over people. And then we've got the dashing Captain Ralph Pullen.
Ah, Captain Pullen. I have a feeling we're about to get a love triangle here.
You got it. And not just any love triangle. This one really highlights the power dynamics between men and women at the time.
Oh, I see. So Marriott's using this romantic entanglement to say something deeper about Victorian society.
Exactly. Harriet's completely infatuated with Ralph, but Eleanor, she's more reserved, you know, holding back her true feelings.
Because that's what women were expected to do back then.
Yeah, and then there's Margaret. She sees right through Ralph's charm. She's worried about Harriet getting hurt.
You know, it's interesting to see how each of these women, they all have their own desires and vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
But they're all navigating a world where men hold most of the power.
Yeah, and it makes you think, doesn't it, about how much those societal expectations shape our choices, even the unspoken ones.
Definitely. And as if all that wasn't enough, there's this, like, a sense of illness and decline hanging over everything.
Right. It's like a shadow lurking in the background. Margaret's baby, Ethel, she gets sick, and the Baroness's son, Bobby, he's described as frail.
It's all very ominous. Like something bad is about to happen.
Yeah, and this is where Dr. Phillips enters the picture. He starts dropping some serious hints about Harriet's past.
Ooh, okay, here we go. This is where it gets really gothic.
He suggests that her presence might actually be harmful to those around her. And he talks about her parents, especially her mother.
What about her mother?
Well, he paints her as this, you know, almost monstrous figure. He suggests that she had this lust for blood.
Lust for blood, like a vampire.
He even implies that it might stem from a vampire bat bite during pregnancy.
Okay, now that's creepy. But also kind of telling, right? I mean, talking about a Jamaican woman, a biracial woman in this way.
Yeah.
It seems like Marriott is playing into those Victorian anxieties about race and otherness.
Oh, absolutely. Harriet's mother becomes this symbol of all those fears.
And Dr. Phillips is basically saying that Harriet might inherit these so-called vampiric tendencies.
Exactly. He even suggests that she might be unconsciously draining the life force from those around her.
Wow, that is heavy stuff.
Yeah.
So is Harriet consciously doing harm? Or is she like a victim of her ancestry?
Right, that's the question. Is she in control of her own nature? Or is she doomed to repeat the supposed sins of her parents? It's like a Victorian nature versus nurture debate, but with this supernatural twist.
And that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's this ambiguity. It makes you think about agency and fate. And those are questions we still grapple with today.
Oh, for sure. But amidst all this talk of curses and inherited flaws, there's Anthony Pennell. He's like a breath of fresh air in all this darkness.
Anthony Pennell. Tell me about him.
He's charming, idealistic, a writer, and he falls for Harriet.
And he doesn't believe all this stuff about her being dangerous?
No, he sees the good in her. He believes in her.
It's almost like he's a counterpoint to Dr. Phillips, right?
Mm,
One represents fear and judgment, and the other hope and acceptance.
exactly.
So we've got this, like, battle playing out between fear and love, but it all seems to be taking place against the backdrop of this very oppressive, very gothic red house.
Right, the red house. Yeah, it's the Baroness's home. And it becomes the symbol of her own manipulative nature.
So at first, she showers Harriet with gifts and attention, but
That facade fades quickly, and the house itself, it becomes like a gilded cage trapping Harriet.
and it's not just Harriet who's trapped, is it?
What?
There's Miss Windward, too, the Baroness's companion.
Poor Miss Windward. She's caught in the cycle of fear and dependence.
A reminder that women didn't have many choices back then, especially if they weren't financially independent.
Right. And then there are all these strange things happening at the Red House. Mysterious visitors, hushed conversations, whispers of shady business deals.
Ooh, it sounds like something out of a Gothic novel.
Which, of course it is. Marriott really builds that atmosphere of suspense.
So, amidst all this darkness and manipulation, Harriet and Anthony's relationship starts to blossom. It's like a little ray of light.
It is, isn't it? They find solace in each other, they share a love of music, literature, and, a real understanding of each other's souls.
It's a beautiful thing to see that kind of connection bloom in such an unlikely setting. And they decide to get married despite everything.
It's a bold move, like they're saying, we choose love no matter what.
And I'm guessing that's when things really start to get complicated.
Yeah, because their happiness is fragile. It's constantly under threat. And then, tragedy strikes.
What happens?
Bobby, the Baroness's son, he dies suddenly.
Oh no, and I bet the blame falls on Harriet.
Of course, the Baroness accuses her of being responsible.
Which, considering everything she's been told about herself, probably makes her feel even worse.
Exactly. She's already struggling with all this guilt and self-doubt. And now, with Bobby's death, those feelings intensify.
And there's this ambiguity, right? We don't know for sure if she's responsible.
No, and that's what makes it so chilling. It's that classic Gothic uncertainty, playing on our fears and suspicions.
So what do Harriet and Anthony do?
They decide to leave the Red House. They travel across Europe, hoping to escape the drama and find some peace.
Seeking solace and maybe even a cure for Anthony, who's still struggling with his health. But will they outrun the shadows that seem to be following them?
Well, that's a story for another time.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. But come back next time as we continue our deep dive into the blood of the vampire. We'll see what fate has in store for Harriet and Anthony as they journey through Europe.
It's going to be a wild ride, I can tell you that. So you know how Dr. Phillips was talking about Harriet's heritage? Well, he really gets into some unsettling stuff about her parents, especially her mother.
Oh, yeah. It's almost like he's trying to paint her as some kind of monster, right?
Yeah, he uses this really loaded language talking about her lust for blood. And he even suggests that she might have been influenced by, get this, a vampire bat bite during pregnancy?
A vampire bat bite.
Seriously, so it sounds crazy, but you can see how it plays into those Victorian fears about female sexuality and anything that was considered, like, exotic or foreign.
And of course, Harriet's mother, being a biracial Jamaican woman, she becomes this symbol of all those anxieties.
Exactly. And Dr. Phillips is basically saying that Harriet could inherit these supposed vampiric tendencies.
So it's not just a question of whether she's dangerous, but whether she's, like, inherently dangerous because of her bloodline.
Right, and it raises all these questions about, like, nature versus nurture. Is she in control of her own actions? Or is she destined to follow in her mother's footsteps?
It's a question that still resonates today.
Yeah.
We're still fascinated by this idea of inherited traits, both physical and behavioral.
Oh, absolutely. But in the midst of all this talk about curses and inherited flaws, we have Anthony Pennell. He's the one who really sees Harriet for who she is.
He doesn't buy into all this stuff about her being dangerous.
Not at all. He sees her goodness, her intelligence, her artistic spirit. He's drawn to her warmth and kindness, and those qualities seem even brighter in contrast to the darkness of the Red House.
It's beautiful in a way to see that kind of love and acceptance amidst all this fear and suspicion.
It is. It's like a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human connection can still thrive. But, their happiness is fragile. It's constantly under threat from the oppressive atmosphere of the Red House and, of course, the Baroness.
Yeah, the Baroness. It seems like she's always lurking in the shadows, pulling strings.
She's a master manipulator, that's for sure. And the Red House itself becomes a symbol of her control, a gilded cage for Harriet.
And it's not just a cage for Harriet, is it? Miss Windward seems pretty trapped, too.
Poor Miss Windward. She's so afraid of the Baroness. She endures all this abuse because she doesn't have anywhere else to go. It's a reminder of how vulnerable women were back
And
then.
how limited their choices were, especially without financial independence. It's a grim reminder of how far we've come in terms of women's rights, but also how much further we still have to go.
Definitely. And amidst all this darkness and manipulation, Harriet and Anthony's relationship continues to grow. It's like a delicate flower pushing through the cracks in the pavement.
Their love is a real act of defiance against the ugliness of the Red House and the Baroness's manipulations, and their decision to marry. It's like a declaration of their commitment to each other, despite everything.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, we choose love, we choose happiness, even in the face of all this darkness.
It's a beautiful sentiment, but I have a feeling their happiness won't last.
You're right. Because lurking in the background is this constant fear of Harriet's supposed curse. And then tragedy strikes.
What happens?
Bobby, the Baroness's son, he dies suddenly. And of course, the blame falls on Harriet.
Oh no, so not only is she dealing with the grief of losing someone she cares about, but she's also being accused of murder.
Exactly. And remember, she's already struggling with all this anxiety about her heritage and the fear that she might be dangerous. So this accusation just reinforces those feelings of guilt and self-doubt.
And it's all made even more chilling by the fact that we don't know for sure what caused Bobby's death.
Right. Dr. Phillips hints at a possible post-mortem, but the cause of death remains ambiguous. Marriott does a brilliant job of creating this atmosphere of suspense and uncertainty.
It's classic Gothic storytelling, using shadows and whispers to keep the reader guessing.
Exactly. And so, with all this hanging over their heads, Harriet and Anthony decide to leave the Red House and embark on a series of journeys across Europe.
They're searching for solace, a change of scenery, maybe even a cure for Anthony's declining health.
But the question is, can they outrun the shadows that seem to be following them?
That's a good question. And we'll have to wait until next time to find out. But be sure to come back for the final part of our deep dive into the blood of the vampire. We'll see what fate has in store for Harriet and Anthony as they journey through Europe. Last time, we left Harriet and Anthony setting off across Europe, trying to find some peace and quiet, and maybe even a cure for Anthony. They go to all these amazing places, Paris, Mentone. You'd think all that beauty would offer some relief, right?
You would, wouldn't you? But it's like no matter where they go, they can't quite outrun the darkness that's been following them.
It's like that old saying, wherever you go, there you are.
Exactly. And all the while, Anthony's health keeps getting worse. It's this slow, subtle decline, but it's always there, looming over them.
Like a ticking clock in the background.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, is this just a coincidence? Or is it, connected to Harriet's supposed curse? Marriott keeps us guessing right until the very end.
And then, in Florence, tragedy strikes. Anthony dies suddenly.
It's devastating. All that hope, all that love just gone in an instant.
And I imagine Harriet blames herself.
Right. Of course. She's been told over and over again that she's dangerous, that she brings harm to those she loves. So in her grief, she believes it. It's really a testament to the power of those internalized messages,
It's heartbreaking to think that she carries all that weight on her shoulders.
And so, driven to despair, Harriet takes her own life.
It's such a tragic ending, a culmination of all the fear and prejudice she's faced throughout her life.
It is tragic, but it also serves as this powerful commentary on the consequences of societal prejudice. Harriet's death isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a societal failure. A failure to see past those preconceived notions and recognize her humanity.
It's a reminder that words have power, that labels and judgments can have devastating consequences.
Exactly. But even in the midst of all this tragedy, there's a glimmer of redemption. In her final act, Harriet leaves her entire fortune to Margaret.
Really?
Yeah. It's an expression of her enduring gratitude and love for her friend.
It's a bittersweet note to end on. But it shows that even after everything she's been through, Harriet's capacity for love and compassion remained.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into The Blood of the Vampire, I think we're left with a lot to think about.
Definitely. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish reading it. Marriott's novel is so much more than just a spooky Gothic tale. It's a reflection of those Victorian anxieties about race and gender and inheritance. It's a social commentary. And ultimately, it's a tragedy that speaks to the enduring power of prejudice and the need for empathy.
It really makes you think about the impact of our words and actions on others, and the importance of challenging those societal norms that perpetuate harm.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadowy world of the blood of the vampire. It's been a fascinating, if a bit unsettling, exploration.
And until next time, keep diving deep and questioning everything.